going to take a few minutes to unpack Inquiry by Design's targeted writing lessons in this video. And I want to make sure that we all understand what a versatile tool these are, how we can use them in the classroom, what some of the features are, and to know some of the finer points of how we can make selections that work for our students and meet their needs. So the first thing, of course, is where to find them. And if you go to your district's Digital Resource Hub, you'll find the targeted writing lessons on the main page. You can click right there and it will take you down, or you can scroll straight down and you'll find that they are organized in the 3 different writing types that are discussed in the standards. So we have argument, info-explanatory, and narrative writing. And if we click on argument, we open up the page full of targeted writing lessons for argument. As you look at this list, it might initially seem a little overwhelming. There are about 40 different lessons in here, and you'll see that it looks maybe even a little more than 40 on here. And that's because some of these show up in multiple places. We'll talk about why that is in a moment. But first, it's a good idea to get on, explore a little bit, see what some of these things are on here. You can open up either of these to learn a little bit about them, but this video will cover that information. The targeted writing lessons themselves all follow the same format. And so we're going to look at one to discuss what that looks like and how it can be used in the classroom. I've opened one up and it's choosing and writing arguable claims. The features of the format that I want to point out right now are that there are 3 sections to every targeted writing lesson. There is a brief bit of direct instruction about whatever that topic is. There is a middle section where students put into practice some of what they've learned in that first part. So they're working with something in their writing, they might be trying it out, making a chart of different ideas. And in the third section, they take what they've developed and they bring it back into the writing that they're working on. A couple additional features, you'll see that of course there's the title. And when you open up any of these, you'll also find like a 1-sentence description of the lesson, so that you don't have to read through the whole thing to see if it's going to address what you're hoping it does in the lesson. So you can always look at the description for a quick idea of what's going on. Now, the lesson itself and the way this is structured gives us some clues to how we can use it in the classroom. First, this direct instruction at the beginning is very user-friendly. So you should be able, as a teacher, to pull this up and with a little bit of review, use it pretty easily. It should make pretty good sense to you and hopefully obviously to students as well. And you can always use these as whole class instruction, especially when you're starting out. That might make sense when you're getting used to these, to find something that many of your students need to work on, to try it out that way. However, you will also find as you work with them that they're written in a way that allows you to do more than that. There's some flexibility built into these where you can group students according to their needs. So you might have some students who need to work on their claims, and you might have some students who need to work on, for example, explaining their evidence more clearly. You can pull a targeted writing lesson for each group. You can get each group working on it and sort of conference with both of them as needed. These are also written in a way that you could hand it off to another adult in the room. So you might have a co-teacher or a teaching assistant in the room that could be running the work with another group as well. And you will also likely have some students who are capable of working through some of these independently. So at the most flexible level, you could potentially be working with a group of students on your own, while somebody else is helping another group of students, and several students are working independently on their own targeted writing lessons. So there's a huge amount of flexibility in it. But when you're starting off, feel free to work with whole class instruction as you get the hang of it. The other thing that is made clear by the structure of these is that all of these are intended to work with student writing that is already in progress in some way. So none of these targeted writing lessons are meant to be delivered in a vacuum. They don't create writing prompts for students or move students through arcs of work separate from everything else. All of these are lessons that help students develop or revise their writing in process. Now, you can do that at different stages. We'll talk about that in a moment. But all of these work with in-class assignments that might come from Inquiry by Design materials, of course, but also really anything that fits into the genre that the lessons apply to. So if we've got any type of argument, we should be able to find work in here that helps our students. So the next question I want to make sure we address is, how do we choose lessons appropriate for our students? And you'll notice on here that the targeted writing lessons are laid out in a grid that corresponds to the Inquiry by Design writing rubric. That gives us one easy tool to reference as we think about what our students' needs are. So if we're scoring student work and we're noticing that perhaps many of our students have some needs showing up in their organization, we might start looking at targeted writing resources that are in that organization row. Or we might be noticing that many of our students' scores are grouping around a certain score point. And of course, we can look in the column for that score point. And depending on how targeted we want to get, we can also think about individual student needs, and we can think about different rows and columns, and we can kind of arrange this in any number of ways. But when you look at the rubric, I want to point out that our Inquiry by Design rubrics correspond very closely to, of course, the standards. So you'll see exact language in our rubrics, like in 12th grade, for example, we've got the requirement that students build a knowledgeable context for their claims, discuss counterclaims, establish the significance of their claims, anticipate audience responses, and we see that exact language in the standards. So we see some of that right here: precise claims, distinguish it from opposite or opposing claims. We need to, sorry, that's 9th and 10th. We see here at 11th and 12th grade that we establish the significance of the claim. We're, of course, anticipating the audience's knowledge level and concerns, values, and biases. The language of the standards is reflected in our rubric. And our rubric is directly connected to the resources in the targeted writing lessons. So, of course, you'll find here lessons like anticipating audience responses, establishing the significance of the claim, and other detailed items like that. It's worth noting that the targeted writing lessons are a much more detailed and sort of fine-grained writing support than what you'll find in our form guides. Our form guides are an important structure for responding to student writing. It provides some of the core instruction around the most important features of each genre, whether that's, again, argument, info-explanatory, or narrative. Those are important and useful, and sometimes you need something more than that or different from that. And so these targeted writing lessons go in at a much finer grain size in their instruction. So we've talked about what they are. We've talked about how the lessons are structured and some of the ways you can use them in the classroom. I've brought up how they correspond to the rubric. And knowing that they correspond to the rubric, that should tell us a little bit about how we can choose ones for our students. Now, of course, we can always just sort of skim through the titles, look for what's interesting, pull it up and see if the description matches. But we can also be pretty strategic about our actions. We can look at perhaps a category of the rubric that is a focus of ours, or we can look at the score points that correspond to our students' writing. And we'll see in there that sessions of work are devoted to helping students build their writing up to the next level in the rubric. And that means that at the very basic levels of this, we see lessons that are establishing just some sort of like ground level understandings for that genre. If we have students who are scoring a 1 in argument, it may be that they need some instruction in just the basic features of what argument writing looks like. So that might mean looking at components of an argument, for example, and really just breaking down what are these pieces that need to show up in an argument. And we might see that students need to form a claim. They might not have a claim in their paper, and it can't be an argument if it doesn't have a claim. Now, students quickly move beyond that. And so we want to help them develop through this whole extent of the rubric and really up to the level of the standards. But you don't move from 1 to 4 immediately. It doesn't make sense for a student who is scoring a 1 to start working on establishing the significance of the claim when really there's a lot more important work that needs to be layered in there. So you'll notice in these that there are some aspects of the work that show up at multiple levels. So we have a claim, like forming a claim from scratch. But also we have forming clear claims, how to write supportable claims, arguable claims. We have refining our claim for specificity here, up to establishing the significance of the claim. You'll also notice that some lessons show up in multiple places, and that's because really a student who's scoring in that 2 or 3 range, both of those students would benefit likely from refining their claims. So it's not exclusive. It's not only these apply to a level 2 and only these apply to a level 3. A lot of times there's overlap between score points and sometimes between categories as well. So for example, there might be aspects that show up in comprehensive understanding that are also important for the development of the writing as well. And so you'll see those lessons in both places, just so that teachers who are looking in a particular row can find all of the work that would apply to that. Now, I've mentioned earlier in this video that the structure of these lessons is built around the idea that there's already some type of writing going on in the classroom. And that helps us answer this last question of when do we use these resources? You can pull targeted writing lessons for use in the classroom at just about any part of the writing process for some writing task that's happening in the classroom. That means that as students are preparing to write a task or write a response to a task, you might pull targeted writing lessons based on what you've already seen those students do in their previous writing. So you might know from, for example, the first response in a unit that students need some assistance in establishing some evidence in their papers. So you might pull some of those lessons. Or students might already be in the drafting process. So instead of doing it at the very beginning, students might be drafting their work. You're conferencing with students and you're noticing a few needs pop up. Okay, we can select lessons based on those needs that we're seeing. And finally, we might have a stack of papers that's been turned into us. And as we read through them, we realize that we want our students to go through a round of revision. And many of these are excellent for revision exercises. They push students right back into the writing they've been doing and ask them to, for example, reconsider their evidence or list out exactly what they've been saying in different parts of it and to reconsider it. And so they push students into that thinking work that is especially helpful for strong revision. So just about all of these can be used at the beginning of a writing task, during the drafting process, or even as a tool for revision afterward. We hope that you'll take some time to look through the targeted writing lessons. That's certainly the best way to get to know them. As you look through all of the lessons and look through the different genres, you're going to see things that stand out to you that you might want to try out. Feel free to try them out with the whole class at first before you get more comfortable with them. And then you can experiment with different ways of grouping students and working to target the particular needs of the students in your classroom, because that's always what we're aiming for. We want to look to see what our students are showing us in their writing, and we want to respond to that with targeted instruction. Thank you.